Hi, folks. My name is Dave Meyer. I work with ATD Fourth World in the US. Thank you so much for coming out today for our webinar, The Experience of Poverty as Subjugation, Insights from ATD Fourth World's New Research. I'm going to give a quick introduction just technically into how things are going to work, and then I'll pass the mic on to Amelia Mayona, who will be managing and sort of moderating our panel today. We really do hope this is going to be a discussion. We're going to have a series of presentations, but afterwards we really want to include questions, as many from the audience as we can. You'll notice on the right side of your screen, there's a little GoToWebinar control panel with a chat box. I noticed some of you have already been sending in messages. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. If you can put your questions in there, my colleague Carolyn in New York will be making sure that she gets them all to Amelia so she can ask them when the discussion comes up. And if you prefer, of course, you can also shoot us on Twitter. ATD Fourth World _US is our account. Also the hashtag #NoPoverty. And then just real quick, if you're looking for more information about the research we'll be talking about tonight, you can find some of that online with regards to the US, which is what Marianne will be talking about, map.fourthworldmovement.org. And then the international research can be found at www.atd-fourthworld.org. And if you have any questions or any technical difficulties during the event, feel free to shoot us an email at communications@fourthworldmovement.org. Thanks so much. I'm going to quickly pass the mic over to Amelia now.
Welcome to the webinar, The Experience of Poverty as Subjugation. The webinar discussion is based on the findings of the participatory action research entitled Multidimensional Aspect of Poverty. The research started under the premise that poverty goes much deeper than just income level. The findings corroborate this statement. The research was conducted in 6 countries, including Bangladesh and the United States. And the methodology used in this research was merging of knowledge. The rationale was that usually certain types of knowledge are overvalued, dismissing the voices of marginalized groups. Therefore, merging of knowledge aimed at capturing the voices and the expertise of 3 groups of participants in each country. This consisted on academics who study poverty, practitioners who work alongside people living in poverty, activists, and this term was chosen by themselves, activists who experience poverty every day. The dialogue will center on subjugation, a core process related to the multidimensions of poverty in the United States. An activist in Boston participated in the research project said, "When you live in poverty, you are always under somebody's thumb." This experience of constantly being pushed to the bottom is what the United States researchers call subjugation. It alludes to economic, ideological, and social forces that impose domination and maintain the status quo. The presentations and dialogue today will center on the following questions. How does the dynamic of subjugation play a role in your reality? What do people do to resist this process? The presenters in the webinar are Marianne Broxton, Director of the United States branch of the International Multidimensional Aspect of Poverty Research. Her firsthand experience of poverty combined with her academic studies give her a unique approach to the research of poverty in the United States. Anura Mittal, founder and executive director of the Oakland Institute, is an internationally renowned expert on development, human rights, and agriculture issues. Lenin Rahman is the founder and executive director of MATI, a grassroots organization working with people living in poverty in Bangladesh. Dr. Khan Is a professor at the Agricultural Economics Department of Bangladesh Agriculture University and a member of the Bangladesh Dimensions of Poverty National Research Team. Also part of this team are Dave Major, who works as a Special Projects Outreach Manager for ATD Fourth World Movement, and he is the coordinator of the webinar. Amelia Mayona, myself, I participated as a member of the United States National Team in this research project, and I will be the moderator of the panel. I am an assistant professor at the School of Education and Social Policy at Merrimack College, United States. With no further ado, Marianne Broxton will start the dialogue with her presentation by addressing the question, how does the dynamic of subjugation play a role in your reality, and what do people do to resist this process?
Thank you, Amelia. I would like to base my comments today in the definition that we on the U.S. research team use to define subjugation. And we stated, in the United States, there is a dominant segment in society that exploits and takes advantage of people, wielding power over individuals, communities, and sovereign Native American nations. Subjugation is a matrix creating and supporting dehumanizing categories in a wide spectrum that goes from criminalization of people experiencing poverty to passive acceptance that no one cares about those people. Seems like a lot. When we talk about subjugation, it's very hard to separate subjugation from racism because they're so intertwined together that sometimes it's hard to tell them apart, and that sometimes their relationship to each other almost becomes symbiotic, feeding off of each other. And subjugation in the United States is not a new phenomenon. It started even before there was a United States. And it began with the genocide of Native Americans, the scourge of slavery that lasted for 400 years, went on to Japanese internment camps, forced sterilization of both women of color and white women living in poverty, to the redlining and segregation that existed, to the prison industrial complex, to currently right now the idea of children being separated from their parents and held in cages at the southern border because they were coming here to seek asylum. That the idea that when we talk about the idea of those people and how they are treated and how they are othered and how that creates a dynamic of power in subjugation. Which is basically subjugation is power over people by one dominant group that views the other group as lesser and therefore not deserving of humanity by casting them as the other. In the US, we don't have a designated caste system. It is more so unspoken and is related to control. And it's supported by all of us, whether in society, whether we recognize it or not, whether it's done purposely or unconsciously. And it's basically how our system is set up, that one group of people ends up dominating another group of people and controlling the resources by designating the other group of people as the other, or not worthy of resources, humanity, and in some cases existing. When we were doing this research, a practitioner stated that, how can you feel like you have no control in a free country? Like they didn't just understand this. And as Amelia quoted the activist in Boston, describing subjugation as always being under someone's thumb, the feeling of that. More recently in New Orleans, an activist described it as having someone's boot on your neck, to feel that weight on you, to know that you don't have power. The way I like to try to describe it to people and make it a little bit more clear is to use a quote that I read one time that said, people of color maintain white comfort to ensure their own safety. And though it's not as extreme for people that live in poverty in some cases of that, there is the same thing, that they have to quiet themselves or humble themselves, because it's similar in a way, that knowing that power is held over you, the way that and how that can affect what you have access to, where you live, how your family is treated. And the examples I can use to describe that is, I live in housing. So in order to live in housing, there's certain things that you have to do. Recently, we received a letter saying that you cannot open your windows before May 15th because of the heating system, or you will be evicted. And the idea that that's power being held over somebody, a threat. We will take away where you live if you do not follow these rules, which is ridiculous when you think about, like, you know, but and then at the same turn to being told that to be grateful that you're allowed to live here. People have told us stories like that all across the country, and the 23 different peer groups that we conducted about the work conditions that they put up with, having to come into at different hours, or being told to be grateful for the hours that you're given when you work, that if you don't, somebody else will be replaced you, and you can be easily replaced, and just to be put up with it and be grateful you have this job. And a lot of that becomes internalized, that if this is how I'm being treated, well, maybe I'm deserving of this treatment. Is there something wrong with me? And maybe this is all I do deserve. And it becomes very hard for people, that you're feeling like this is the way society views me, that maybe there's something wrong. We're not realizing that, no, it's the structure of our country. It's the structure of our systems that keeps everything else moving, that we always have to have one group that's less than or treated as less than in order to keep things rolling along, and that how we as society use people. I know that may sound funny, you're like saying it like, oh, I would never do that to a person. But another example I use is that when I go to the grocery store, I like the cheap vegetables, you know, but I know somewhere along the line that somebody else was either subjugated or they were treated badly. They had poor work conditions. The job was held over them, that if you don't put up with these conditions, we'll find somebody else to replace you. They did not get a living wage or an equitable wage, and that's the result of that I benefited purchasing these cheap vegetables the way somebody else was treated in life. And that's a support system, whether we want to admit it or not, that's a way that we can contribute to it. The one thing I do want to say, though, that even though subjugation does exist in the US, and people do feel like under the thumb and under someone's boot, that it's not constant drudgery. You know, you can find your way and try to do like little acts of resistance, you know. One member of the US research team talked about how he does his poetry and his creativity, and that's how he gets it out, expresses himself and how he resists. Another person does it through their music. Other people across the country do it by joining groups and being activists and fighting for the rights that they have. So that even though there is subjugation, and it does set the tone for all the other dimensions that come from it, because once you are subjugated and viewed as the less than or the other, it puts you into disadvantaged areas. It shows what access you have to resources, and how it affects your health and well-being, both physically and mentally. It squashes your voice. There are still people that have little acts of fighting back against it. At this point, I'd like to turn it back to Amelia, who I believe will turn it over to Lennon, and he will tell you about how subjugation affects people in Bangladesh. Thank you.
So, Lennon, so
Yes.
this will be the time to address a subjugation from the experiences and the finding in Bangladesh.
Thank you. My name is Lenin Rahman. as you introduced myself, I'm working since 20 years with the people living in poverty in the rural and urban areas in Bangladesh. So if I talk about subjugation in Bangladesh, I rather say it is we do have this in other form. We can say it suppressed, or it's actually rather a deep-rooted feeling of our history in Bangladesh and history of this subcontinent, of Indian subcontinent. We used to be under the Maharajas, with the kingdom. Later on, we were under the Mughals. Later on, we were under British. Then once we are also under Pakistan. And actually, since many, many years, people really deep-rooted this subjugation feeling through the feudalism structure in Bangladesh, and we carry it. We carry in ourselves, we carry in our society, and you can find it all over. So actually, fighting against it, it doesn't really help in this situation, because there is many other power structure is working through the subjugation structure. The power was always handed over through the rich and the powerful people to the rich people. It is kind of heritage. The poor people or the people living in poverty, they had to go through it, and they were a part of it. So all the society, we carry it. So actually, during the time of Pakistani rule of Bangladesh, we first fight 1951 for our own language. We couldn't speak our language because they wanted to put their language in as a national language, that was Urdu. So that was our starting, actually, to fight against fight against the feudalism structure, fight against the suppressed structure. So later on, in 1971, we were independent, and this poor country was very vulnerable, and we exactly carry on the same thing, and we carried it in the politics, in the structure, and in our society. Interesting part of it is, if I go through my own work, working with the people living in poverty, where we, as a activist practitioner, we wanted that the people fight against it, but we realized that people cannot fight against it, because this power structure is so strong that even the people living in poverty, they want to be with the power, so they underlie themselves with the power and carry this subjugated situation for them. Just to interrupt, I just wanted to give you a background of historical, how we carry this. So Dr. Khan will tell a little bit more about the present condition, which is how we carry this old structure of feudalism structure, suppressed structure to our society now, in the politics, in the education, in the work we do every day, in the family we have it, and in society we have it. So Dr. Khan, I will hand over to Dr. Khan. Emily.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Lenin Rahman. I am Mr. Khan from Bangladesh Agriculture University, working in Dimension of Poverty project as an academic researcher. In reality, we observed subjugation is a problem, and it is not a new phenomenon. It is linked with poverty in Bangladesh. Lenin Rahman has nicely described the history of subjugation in Bangladesh, but at present, there are many obstacles placed by our social and political structure that prevent people in poverty from improving their livelihood situation. In Bangladesh, we found 9 dimensions of poverty, of which 7 are directly or indirectly relevant with subjugation, except overpopulation and environmental degradation, although our no dimension was named as subjugation. You know, health, education, food, shelter, this is our constitutional fundamental rights. But in general, wealthy people are getting more benefits than the poor. And all activities are being controlled by the political leader and influential people of the society. In Bangladesh, subjugation can be divided from different aspects like social, religion, institutional subjugation, political subjugation, etc. And all this subjugation are interlinked. I would like to give some example of subjugation from present context of Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, at present, still we have social stratification or classification. This is on the basis of economic situation, especially as per income, wealth, and family hierarchy. There are many people who work as maid servant or domestic worker to the house of rich people, and they do not have any voice or participation in the society. They are very low paid and do not get sufficient food, clothes, and not even sleeping place. They normally sleep in the kitchen or floor of dining room. More importantly, they do not have a specific period of time to work, and duration of work fully depends on owner of the house. So everything is controlled by the owner of the house. Therefore, these people cannot go out of poverty. It is very alarming that you will find thousands of maid servant supply agencies in capital city, Dhaka. In society, normally men are treated superior than the women, and most of the women is controlled by the men. That is, women don't have decision-making power in Bangladesh. That is, I am talking about gender inequality and social norms. The gender inequality and social norms often force women to remain out of the way from certain occupation and accept low wages. Same way, boys are treated superior than girls in a family. It is observed in most of the poor family. Only one son goes to school and daughter remain at home. About 59% girls in Bangladesh are married before 18 years old, and 22% married before the age of 15 years. So basically, girls cannot take any decision when to get married and marriage to whom. Rather depends on parents' decision. Therefore, they cannot come out of poverty. In addition, religion and caste system also act as subjugation. In Hindu religion, they have different caste system, where some caste is being considered as superior. A person who works as sweeper remains sweeper generation by generation, and they are basically controlled by some other caste like Brahman. Therefore, these people cannot go beyond the poverty. In case of institution, poverty is created when both public and private institution does not respond to the critical needs of the people. And this situation is occurred when institutions are controlled by few people and others do not have any voice and participation. I am just giving one example from Bangladesh garment sector. Even though industrial development has been achieved remarkably in Bangladesh, especially in case of ready-made garment sector, there is about 5 million people are working as labor of the sector, of which 90% are women. But most of the governments have no strong labor organization to establish their legal rights. It is observed in several times that whenever labor has started some movement for the legal rights, especially for minimum wage, that means $97 per month only, they were tortured and harassed by the owner of the factory with the help of police. These garments owners are very much powerful and most of them are involved in politics. Therefore, the all workers are being subjugated by the owner of the factory. Same thing, this political subjugation in Bangladesh. Despite economic progress, Bangladesh's democratic development has been hampered in a matter of serious frustration to the public, for the public. All institutions, especially government and semi-government, are being controlled by the ruling party and they exercise their power. So this is the lack of good governance. And lack of good governance is a real problem in all institutions that we found as a dimension of poverty in Bangladesh. You know, corruption level is very high in all government offices, especially in local government, where many development and social programs are being implemented for reducing poverty. This local government is basically controlled by the politician and poor people not getting proper benefit from these programs. For an example, more than 114 social safety net programs are running now, but poor people have to pay some money to the local leader to get some benefit from this program. In addition, nepotism is another problem in this case. Recruitment in civil administration couldn't be made on the basis of merit. Rather, civil administration has been politicized with political link. This is another problem, and this is dominant political parties have managed to capture civil society organizations that have diminished over the years. People, those have power, are getting all benefits from state and society, and other general people wants to get benefit from these powerful people. Therefore, they join with powerful people, rather stand against. Therefore, these poor people remain poor and income inequality is increasing day by day, and the bargaining power of the poor people is also decreasing day by day. This is all over the situation of Bangladesh about subjugation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. I would like to give the space to Anuradha Mittal and present her experiences working at the Auckland Institute related to the Global South and in relationship to the findings of these multidimensions of poverty with the core concept of the process of subjugation. So Anuradha.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
And thanks. First of all, thanks to the previous panelists for sharing their very valuable insights. At the Oakland Institute, we are a policy think tank looking at the social, economic, cultural implications of some of the policies that are designed in the North. So I think just what might be relevant is one of the focuses that we have, looking at how these so-called development institutions, whether it is USAID, whether it is the World Bank, or whether it is institutions such as DFID in UK or Norfund in Norway, how they have become instruments of driving policies in the third world, in so-called developing countries, which has led to, on one hand, access and control over their natural resources by Western corporations, but it also has very debilitating impact on the local communities, human rights violations, subjugation, as we're talking about. So perhaps I'll briefly just touch upon one specific way of how they do it. You know, we talked about, or we heard on this webinar about colonization that countries such as Bangladesh have emerged from. And freedom from colonization has not just been about political sovereignty, but also economic freedom. My own country, India, when it was colonized by the British, our resources were used to enrich and profiteer, the colonial power, while there were famines and death in the country. So while the countries have become independent, a new way of subjugation, a new way of colonization has been through policies. For instance, today you have doing business rankings. The countries in the third world are treated as students in a primary school where the World Bank is ranking them in terms of what they are like to do business with. So this ranking is not based on that it is good to do business with a country because it has respect for labor rights, it has respect for human rights. Instead, the ranking is based on what will make it easier for a business to operate in a country. And very often that means, well, not very often, almost always it means a country, for instance, if it further deregulates or gets rid of environmental regulations, it gets a higher ranking. If a neighboring country does the same and also gets rid of, labor protections, it'll get even a better ranking. So it has created a race to the bottom where the countries are competing against each other to attract foreign investment, which is today is being touted as a panacea for all kind of ills, whether it's poverty or hunger. But in the process, it is not just has a devastating impact on the environment, but making the most vulnerable, most marginalized communities even more marginalized. So these ranking systems have continued. They are supported by some of the largest institutions and countries in the world. Today, based on doing business rankings, they have asked the World Bank to create another rankings, which rank countries on enabling the business in agriculture. And this is financed by, UK, DFID, it is financed by United States, these rankings through USAID and through the Gates Foundation. So in the name of bringing prosperity to third world countries, really enabling the business of agriculture is forcing countries to, privatize the seed sector. So in countries where farmers have always saved seeds, exchanged seeds, they have had seed banks. In some countries like Tanzania, that is being criminalized. And you get a good ranking if you basically open yourself to Western seed corporations to come and take over your seed market. Or you kind of make your public lands, the commons, available to go to the highest bidder, which is having devastating impact on countries where agrarian economies, where most population are involved in agriculture, and their land rights are being marginalized. And in the process of that, what we are seeing all over Africa, Asia, Latin America, more and more vulnerable communities who depend on land for their livelihoods are being turned from being smallholder farmers, from being campesinos, turning into plantation workers. And the subjugation that comes in terms of your absence of even minimum wage jobs, where your access to be able to feed your families and communities is dependent on these seasonal menial jobs. That is being spread as the new development paradigm all over the world, and that is called enabling the business of agriculture. I will end by saying that this is something that is not being taken down lightly. At the Oakland Institute, we are part of and coordinate a coalition of over 280 members around the world, which is called Our Land, Our Business, basically challenging that who gave the authority to these rich countries, who gave the permission to institutions such as the World Bank to rank these countries on what they're like to do business with, instead of determining and helping foster for the human rights regimes, labor rights regimes, environmental protections. You can learn more about Our Land, Our Business. You can learn more about the research which is available on our website at oaklandinstitute.org. And I'm very glad to answer any questions that might be there. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to see if there are some questions from the audience. So while we wait for the question from the audience, what we have been listening is that Marianne talked about the subjugation in the context of the United States and the capitalist system. And Dr. Khan and Lennon talked about subjugation in different sociopolitical and economic systems. They talked about the historical background of feudalism and colonial period and the current system of the capitalist system. So it seems like, and here are your thoughts on this, that the subjugation is not specifically connected to any economic, political, and social system. And if not, where are the roots of this process? Anybody would like to share your thoughts about this?
I know you were saying, Amelia, that if it's not specifically from one country or one policy, that one group that's doing it as far as governmental, I think it really has to do, like I was saying, how like we in the U.S. we don't have an official caste system. It's more like an unwritten acceptance that there's one group of people that are treated as less than, and because they're worth less and they deserve less, that's how it becomes acceptable in a society, and that it also helps support a society going forward. That the idea that one group, it is okay to, because when we look at things, we say we need workers in society, and who would best fit this, or that if, we all want to be able to have access to resources, we can blame one group saying that they're getting the resources, and if we take it from them, or we can blame the ills in society on this one group, and that's how it ends up becoming perpetuated throughout society. And another way, like we all support it, is like the way we were talking about how it becomes acceptable or just fine, is that we all love iPhones in the US, but as Anuradha was saying, like how the companies are going to other countries and how they treat their workers, how are the people that make those iPhones being treated, that we just accept that their conditions, their working conditions, as long as we have what we need and our needs are met, are being taken care of. The one thing I like I started to talk about before is that Listening to all this can be a little bit overwhelming, like if you're not familiar with this or you don't recognize it, and sometimes it can make you feel a little bit hopeless, feeling that, okay, there's these strong social structures which are so embedded in culture and history, and like how do people in poverty keep living their hope, keep their hope alive, and what can like civil society and governments do to connect the hope and the way these people resist. With ATD, in the US, the one thing that we say is that we're trying to build a movement to recognize that these are the dimensions that people face, the dimensions of poverty, that subjugation leads to all the other dimensions, as Professor Khan was saying it does in Bangladesh, and that we've heard from the other countries, that they may not name it as subjugation like Professor Khan said, but it's still there. The feelings and the sentiments and the description of it is still there. And that if we want to resist this with civil society and governments, and how we can connect to the way people resist and how they carry on their hope, is that we have to start looking at ourselves. And the way we can do that is shame-free policies. When we talk about the policies that are set in our government, Anurada was saying that other countries, they won't work with them businesses won't work with them if they accept human rights, that they do treat their workers equitable. So we need to recognize who's doing that, that's not treating their workers equitable, and avoid those people. We need to try to enforce these laws. We can start by ratifying the human rights compacts that were created in the US, that were where we wrote them up, but we've never ratified them. So we recognize this, that people are being treated this way. And that does connect in a way to what civil society can do, what our local politicians can do as far as when they write laws or create laws and policy, to make sure that they do no harm, that there's no desperate impact from these policies that they create. And civil society can help lobby for these things. And that's the movement that the ATD is trying to create and work around with the MAP project and results from MAP projects, and to create a movement of organizations together. So if anybody else would like to tackle that question too, I'm sorry, I was the first one to jump on it. Please feel free.
Thank you, Marianne. Yes?
Sorry, if I may add, thank you very much, Marianne. I think, which is pretty obvious, but perhaps it's relevant to say that every time when somebody gets poor, somebody gets rich as well. And if we kind of talk about subjugation as happening in a vacuum, it makes you feel like we have no control or any power to change the way the things are. In terms of our own work that we do at the Institute, whether it is foreign corporations, private equity funds, university endowments from Europe, United States, rushing into African countries, for instance, to take over land through their lies, or whether it is the World Bank, opening up countries, it is meant to profiteer someone, which are the Western corporations. So as somebody gets rich, and Western corporations are the ones who are electing the elites in countries like the United States, you have a very legalized criminal system in terms of how there's money in politics. So it is a very nice, you scratch your back and I scratch your back system. But what happens is the indigenous, the smallholder farmers, the third world communities, the workers in the United States to workers in other countries. Marianne talked about iPhone, and how we participate is not just the workers, but also the resources. You couldn't have a damn smartphone if you weren't getting tungsten and others. These are today's blood minerals that are coming from African countries. And we all have been told we have finally been successful if I have my latest iPhone phone. You see school kids who have been brainwashed in countries that you need to have a cell phone, otherwise our hands are going to be like this. But the exploitation that is linked of natural resources, exploitation that is linked of communities, of workers, and the subjugation and the modern day colonization of third world countries that is happening today. If we don't make those linkages, we all feel like this is just how the world was meant to be, and we are helpless participants in this. the fetish for running for the cheapest thing available, not questioning that why don't I have a livable wage, that I have to look for some cheap good made in some country which is cheap because workers in those countries were exploited. So the fate of the workers in United States is today linked with the fate of the workers in third world countries, whether it's China, whether it's Bangladesh, whether it's Honduras. Goods are coming in cheap, and yet somebody is getting very rich. When you look at a system where Amazon and others do not pay taxes, while if you look at the situation and the condition of the public schools in the United States, when you look at my own Oakland, where you have school to prison pipeline, it is all linked. And this system perpetuates the rich, the 1% to get richer, while the majority of the world continues to be subjugated and colonized, and our minds are colonized because instead of seeking freedom, we have become tied to, I need to get the latest gadget that will make me seem like I am on social media and therefore I'm cool. So I think it is breaking through those chains of subjugation, not just at political level, but at a mental level, that has become so essential. And to be able to see the globalization of poverty. It is not just versus, the North conquering the South. It is as before, the oppressed, whether the people of color in the United States, whether it is the oppressed in third world countries, our fates, our destinies are united really by the same oppressors. So I'll stop with that.
Thank you, Anuradha. Dr. Khan and Lennon, do you have some comments, observations related to dialogue?
Yes. Maybe just short, I want to add or agree with what Anuradha said. And I just wanted to mention that during our 3 years research, this was the part we actually didn't talk about, that this economical subjugation, which is very strong through the different kind of trade and treaties are made, like GSP, PTA, and all these things, which is a major issue, I think, for poverty also. And during our whole study, it was a participatory study, so it didn't came up in that level like we are talking now, and with also what Anuradha actually described, how the things are happening in the business world and economic subjugation. So I just wanted to mention this, and maybe Dr. Khan.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. This is Anuradha described nicely about the developing country, about subjugation. So this is not only related to economy, this is also related to social and political structure that I described. At Bangladesh, 300 years we were under the colonization system. So now we are mentally set about this system. But we are trying to get rid from the system. But in developing countries, the political situation is not that good enough to get rid of from the system. And social system also not that good enough to go out of poverty from this subjugation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. I have some question myself, but I would like to give space for the audience. They have articulated some questions. And one of the questions is the following. What is the best thing that an American of privilege can do? Probably this is related to Marianne and to Anuradha.
Do you like to go first, Anuradha?
Sorry?
Yeah, if I understand you correctly, you're saying the question is how do, sorry, can you repeat your question?
Yes, I will. Let me go back to the questions. What is the best thing that an American of privilege can do in order to eradicate subjugation, for example?
Well, I would start by saying that I don't know if there's an American of privilege. If you look at the climate crisis, yes, the poor are facing the wrath of Mother Earth first, but none of us are going to be protected from it. So I think that the notion that there is the privilege, I think we need to really question and see the fact that our minds have been captured and subjugated. Who is a person of privilege? The second thing I would say, of course, if you look at the white privilege, for instance, or if you look at economic privilege, the best way to approach is not that I have to feel guilty. I mean, even if you look at the civil rights movement in the 60s, yes, it was not just the organizers were not just Black, but they were also white allies. The best thing we can do as allies is not try to organize the oppressed, but we talk to those that are in a community. So we educate our peers, the so-called privilege, and organize ourselves, because very often the tendency is to go from the US and to go and organize and teach English and bring water to developing countries. I think the best thing we can do is to, first of all, unfree ourselves, unlearn everything that we have been told is what's called successful, and then start organizing our own privileged group. That is, I think, what's really needed, and to be able to identify those tide linkages that we have with the destinies that I talked about before.
Yeah, I agree. I think it sounds very simple, but it's very like the prejudices that we have are ingrained in us, all of us, and we all have it, whether we like to admit it or not, and it's very hard. But as Anurada said, the way to dissolve that is to be completely open, to listen to people that are experiencing this, to follow their lead, to ask them what they need you to do and how they can support, how you can support them. That's what I love about this project, is that this project was done with 3 different groups. It was done with people with the direct experience of poverty, it was done with practitioners, and it was done with academics, and everybody worked together to decide. And a lot of that comes from, like, when we talk about the idea of people with privilege, the idea is that when you talk about volunteerism, when, like Anurada said, like going to another country and telling them what you think they need. But it's done here in the US too. The idea of saying, okay, well, this is what I think people in poverty need to help get better, or to help get out of poverty. The idea that, okay, if you had a budgeting class, you will be fine, not realizing, no, it's the structures and the systems and everything that leads to that. So I would say just being more open to that. And I think the one of the other things I want to touch upon, something Anurada said too a moment ago, when we were talking about the idea, like, how everybody has the cell phones and this and that. It becomes very hard for people that live in poverty, because one, it's like it's in the US, when you have something like that, it's not a luxury anymore. It becomes like a basic need of survival for some people. Like, it's assumed everybody has a phone. And then to be able to say that, okay, when we talk about acts of resistance to subjugation and how people can fight this, being able to, what's other people would call, okay, well, it's self-care, or, I need this, it's survival. But for people in poverty, it might be looked at as, an indulgence, so like to be able, it becomes very hard not to try to live up to like what the American standard is of like, okay, this is a necessity. And then to be able to say, okay, well, to be able to treat yourself, you know what I mean? Because that's what people do every once in a while. You're allowed to treat yourself. And then knowing that, like, when you're doing that, how it affects somebody else, so that even if you don't want to, you're still participating in that role of subjugation for other people. So I just wanted to touch upon that because it becomes, like I said, it becomes very hard for everybody. So I understand that, like, okay, if we talk about people that are privileged and how do I not contribute to this? It is very hard for everybody not to contribute to it. But like I said, it becomes with talking to the policymakers, people in civil society, asking what people need opposed to telling them what they need, and creating laws that fit around that.
Thank you, Anuradha and Marianne. I would like to go to Lennon. And Lennon, you made a comment in your presentation that regarding Bangladesh, something like excluded people want to experience power, so they align with the powerful and carry that structure and subjugation with them. Marianne and Anuradha, we're talking about ways in which privileged people can participate in eradicating subjugation, but you are saying that people living in poverty in Bangladesh, they have internalized and see that they have to participate in order to survive. So what are your comments on that?
Can I just,
Yes.
before you answer Lennon, if it's okay, I just want to jump in and just say Anuradha has to hop off for another meeting, but thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. And we're going to stay on. There were a few more other questions, so we'll stay on and keep talking, but thank you so much for being able to join. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and
Thank you.
pleasure to be with you all on the panel. My gratitude. Take care.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Everyone. Bye.
Sorry to interrupt you, Lennon.
Okay, no problem. Well, I'm back. Yes. What I wanted to tell actually is my experience doing work with the people living in poverty. And I was quite emphasized and motivated in the beginning, like saying 20 years back when the work started, and I thought people will be really, when they empowered by economic status or women empowerment, and they will fight against maybe for the structural problem. What do we have? What I said before, that subjugation in the society. But rather, I realized that once that people do like to be subjugated in a sense of be with the power. And when I mean that, be with the power holding people are the rich people or the wealth people or the politician or the decision making people. If they do wrong or right, that's not the question for them. They rather want to be with that power. Why? Because it's a kind of survival strategy in this society. When you don't have nothing, you are under pressure of your daily life, and also society can also bring you under pressure. Then if you are with the power, then you feel yourself a little bit stronger. Maybe if you were under pressure from society or whatever, maybe this power structure can help you a little bit to come forward or survive. So it's a kind of survival technique, I will say.
As I was saying earlier, when we're given the definition of those people for subjugation, that's a phrase that we heard over and over and over again, that people were always being referred to as those people. And the way that we recognized that once in the U.S. research team, that people sometimes employ what we call respectability politics, meaning that in order to protect myself from being viewed as those people, you automatically identify with the other group, the group that it has the power, and say, no, I'm not like those people that everybody is shunning or ostracizing or marginalizing and leaving out and being subjugated. I'm more like you. So it becomes like a self-defense mechanism more so than anything else. And that also helps perpetuate the subjugation when it becomes that, okay, it's the groups that are people that are in a group trying to differentiate, saying, no, I'm not like those people that we know as society that are treated differently. I'm more like you. So they align with the power. And it's a common nature thing. And it's sad because that's what helps perpetuate it going through over and over again. And that's why people, yeah, it does happen in the US also, like when we defined it as respectability politics. Yes, no, I'm not like those people. I'm just like you too. So don't treat me like that. And in turn, I will treat those people badly also. And it's the same way as Lenin described, as a lot people aligning in Bangladesh with people in power there, so they don't get treated differently also. So yeah, it tends to be kind of universal.
Thank you, Marianne. Here are there is a dialogue with the audience, and Christina from New York is asked the question, how can we work together so that oppressed people and activists from different countries can fight together? And Joseph Bronca from Massachusetts says, I think we need to have movements by human rights activists, to have the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, to have the same scrutiny as the nations that make up the United Nations do every 4 years under the process called the Universal Periodic Review. So this is the participation of some of people who are in the audience asking the question, and also answer one another their thoughts about what to do in terms of addressing subjugation at the national and international level. We have overgone, and it's 2 o'clock and something, so I would like to thank everyone, the panelists and the audience, with their questions in this wonderful dialogue about subjugation. So thank you very much, Lennon and Rosemary, Dr. Khan and David and Anudara, for participating in this webinar.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to say real quickly though, even though we're leaving, as I say goodbye, how do we resolve this? Participation. People with a direct experience of poverty need to be at the table, whether it's at the World Bank, civil society organizations, different participation is what makes it. If people are not there saying what they need and telling you their truths and their stories, then we just keep perpetuating it. So thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. Dave, would you take it from there?
Great, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We saw a few more questions. We may follow up with you by email, and you'll probably hear from us in the future. You can download the full report for the research in the United States at map.fourthworldmovement.org, and the international research at ATD-fourthworld.org to learn more about what Dr. Khan and Lennon have been involved in Bangladesh. Thanks so much, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.